Okay then, so this has been dry now. It's still soft and everything. Now the one thing I did find with this one we've done already, when you put these side panels in, they go in too far. So a nice little tip I actually do, I just take a smidgen of modelling dough. So we've just got a tiny bit like this, okay, and we just stretch it out. Okay, and then when these come along, hopefully they'll sit and be pushed slightly up by them, and also it'll hold them in place. Okay, and then hopefully you can just nudge them and squish them down as is needed. Now the thing with these panels is they will disappear in there too far. Also the front edge tends to be a bit of a nightmare. So what we do, we're just going to hold the back for the moment, and we're going to run some extra thin around here, and just take our time and let that do its bit, if you like, back there on the front end, and then we'll come back and we'll glue the after bit back here because it's just slightly raised, just the tiniest little bit, and we don't want it to go too far. So we can just nudge that in. That's nudged quite nicely, and just let the capillary action whip its way round everywhere and fill in any little gaps that we've got. A tiny little lift on that, so we just need to squash that and hold that down just a sec on that side. But it's worth taking your time with these because they're very noticeable and very in your eye, and the more time you can just make them move a tiny little bit will be less time you are having to end up going around with a filler. So we're just going to hold that just a second. Okay, I wonder if we can get a... That's it. Other side, we just have a quick test fit again to make sure we're okay. We're in the right way. Okay, so there again, it's a bit too far at the back, so we're just going to take a little bit of modelling dough just from the back here. We're just going to stick it down in here, and all this does is just opens it up, pushes it off from the side, and then obviously you can push it in as is required. So we'll just give that a nudge, and that puts it roughly to the right height. I'm happy with that. So we'll come along and we'll glue that in place down the sides. And around the front. And to be honest, this side's gone a lot better than the other side did. So the other one needed lots of filler and lots of time on it. Let's say, whoops, fourth time I've done one of these now, so I'm getting the hang of it. But basically, what we're going to have to do in a moment is come along, a little bit of super glue, which we'll use, and what we'll do, we'll pop along and give it a sanding job. This one, you might be able to see, it's not as crisp as this one, because this one had a lot of sanding, so we're going to have to rescribe this in a moment to put some of that detail back in. But certainly at the top here, those nauticals we're going to have to do again, and things like that. So what we'll do is put a little bit more glue down the bottom here. Okay, obviously down here at the front you can see it's not exactly square, so we're going to have to square that off in a moment, take out some of the little bits and pieces with that, so we can fit this little guy in, this little vent cap at the front. But there we go, that's those bits done, and that is, to be honest, the most trickiest part of the kit, barring the one that we've got remaining, which is this belly section. Now this is dry and handleable. I didn't want to pull around on it before because putting in this belly section is quite difficult. Now on the call out for this, I think it gives it a funny name, something like 1B, that's it. It's basically, there's a sprue, it's a funny way of calling it out, but you've got two different types. You've got 1 and 4. Number 4's got a round flat area on the bottom. This one just conforms along like the normal one does. Now getting this in is somewhat of a tricky little problem, and it will be a massive filler job to make it all blend in and look nice. Basically you push it in as best as you can, something like that, but obviously we've got a huge big seam running down the side here and on the other side, but there's no way around this one. No amount of dry fitting and test fitting is going to make this look particularly nice. So what we're going to do, we're just going to get plenty of glue in this area, and then we're going to come along and really bite the bullet and use filler for the first time on this kit. Proper filler, and just hope it all pulls together and goes in nicely. Now the other one I did built of these, it was a complete and utter nightmare start to finish, so by the time, because I'm on my second one, I know what I'm looking for and little areas. The first one, when I put it in, I didn't do much sanding off. This one, you know, hasn't had it either, but it might be worth sanding a little few of the areas around it. For instance, if you sand down this one, it sits in quite nicely, but for some reason then you get big gap down the side like here. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to push that in flush to make that very nice down in that little seam down there. I'm going to leave it and we're going to fill that in. Otherwise what will happen is we'll lose the height over the overall area as well. And also it just seems to be a little bit too tight as well. We've got quite a nasty raised area along here as well, so we're going to have to take care of that as well. But there again, I want the glue to dry, I want it all to go off before I start putting filler on the top of this. Then once the filler is on it, we can sort of start popping around and tidying up all the little areas. So we'll let that dry off in a moment, and then we'll come back with some filler, get some filler all in that area, some filler around the front here to tidy up those, and then we can have a look at these seams that we've got all running along the back here and everything else and see how they are. So we'll stick that on its roof just for a moment. Wing area is dry, so what we've got to do is tidy up these front edges. There again, coming in with our usual files and things. Take off the fronts, clean them up, and then we can polish them up and everything else, and then we can have a look at, for the first time, getting these engines actually fitted on and see how they're going to fit. Should make a bit of a click when they go in. Sorry, we got the wrong side on, which might help. There again, if we can get it to only line up, we'd be happy. Yeah, it was the right side. So there we go. When you push these in and get them all in, we've got a large, nasty, horrible lump here at the top, which is something we're going to have to deal with, and that is all in nice and flush. As you can see on the side, it's fine. It's just got a very nasty lump up there on the close-up, as you can see. So that's another area where we'll have to get in there, sort that out, fill it, sand it, and obviously we've got a little bit of a gap going on underneath as well. So, you know, we're not out of the woods yet. There's a couple of technical problems to do with this one, but it's something where we need all these parts to be sort of rock hard and finished off and looking nice before we can get them in. Then we can rescribe this area around the top, but because we're going to have to sand and fill to get those to blend in, as I say, there's no real easy fix with that. It's one of those ones where you sort of have to bite the bullet and get in there and do it, a bit like the belly one. Once we've got those done, it really comes together very, very quickly. Okay then, so what we've got now, these parts are all pretty dry, quite happy they are, and I've just had a bit of a sand around along the bottom areas to see how they're looking, making sure all the joins are all okay. As you see, it's just all a bit wet down here. No problem with the major joins. Top ones I haven't done yet, I'll talk those through with you in a moment. Major problem one is obviously this belly plate we was talking about. Now, I've already put this in and it's been drying a bit. What I actually did, use super glue. This is just the normal medium Zappa Gap glue, which I quite like. Just run it in and let it dry naturally. Didn't hit it with the kicker. That way it just sort of sits more. If you hit it with the kicker, it tends to flow and get a bit of capillary action going. But this particular way of doing it, you don't have that trouble. So as I say, you can see it on there. It's had two coats now. It's had a first one, which is a rough one, which really just fills up the hole. This one just makes sure it covers all the areas. So what we actually have is quite a rough sanding stick, quite a coarse one, okay? And then all we're going to do is just knock the top edge clean off of this, all of it. So we'll start pretty rough, coarse one until we're almost there, and then we'll switch to a far finer one. So what we'll do, we'll just rip off the top. Now we're saying this way of doing this with super glue, the fors and against for it, and there are for and against. For it, it dries very, very quick, so you don't have to wait for it like you do with filler to dry off. And for it, again, there's no shrinkage whatsoever. Against it, it's very hard to sand. Obviously, it's not as easy and as smoothable to sand, and it's very hard to rescribe there again because it's very hard. A way to get around that is to actually give it a coat or a dusting with talcum powder or flour even. What that does, it sits amongst all the super glue, and it just makes it a little bit easier to sand than it would be if you're doing it this way. Now what we're going to do is just do this top edge so I can talk you through how we're going to do it. So what we do, we're just Getting this so we're basically flat everywhere. So we just sand this in there a little bit. Okay, so there we go. We're basically flat there, and that line you can see running along there, that's actually rock hard glue. So what we're going to do, we're going to switch down to a thinner sanding stick. This is our nice quad one. So we start with the roughest, and we're just going to go right the way over the entire area. And what we're going to do is wet it a little bit, just to take off. And what this is doing, not only is it obviously making this nice and smooth and rounded and all the rest of it, it's getting rid of all the really heavy duty scratches as well, because it's, you know, we need to polish those big ones out that we've probably made running along here just as much. So we just go along like that one, quite happy. And as that dries, you can see the scratches coming back. Now we're going to switch over to the pink side. There again, we'll wet it again. Okay, and we're just going to give this a nice round buff up. Now the great thing obviously with these sanding sticks is that we don't have the trouble with making a flat area. They're nice and padded, not like some of them which are quite hard. If you have got one, perhaps you're better off doing this with a sponge, which is something we'll do in a moment. But there we go, we whip round with that one. Nice and handy. Obviously I've still got two more grits on the other side, but what I'll do is I'll switch to using a sponge. Now this is the sponge, nice flat one, so we're just going to run along that edge. Circular motions, just like that, very happy. And then as a last one, wet the area quite a bit. Got the finishing or miracle sponge, and this will just take care of all the scratches and give us a nice smooth area. So as I say, I'll do the rest of it, but this will just show us for this bit now. Now there will be a couple of scratches, but 90% of it is gone now. So there we go, you can see that gets rid of that, and there's nothing there at all, and I don't have to worry about its shrinkage. Now as I say, with the shrinkage problem, if that was filler, you give it perhaps, you know, an hour or so, or definitely a couple of days, and then what happens is you'll get a little line will appear in there. Downside to this, obviously we've got to try and rescribe this, which is something we'll do a little bit later on. Anyway, that's the basics of doing a heavy duty filler job that lasts, and it's one you can do in an hour instead of having to wait a long time. Now the other way, if you come along here and we've got something along here, and perhaps you've got quite a big step on this, you know, and it's not a nice one, take your blade of your knife, and all you're going to do is scrape the high side away until the two meet. Now if you get any whiteness showing through, chances are that means there's not enough glue in there, and at this point you come along with your glue, put your glue, okay, and just run it along, and you'll see that white bit disappear, and that's purely because it just wasn't enough glue on there. Pretty common, it happens to me all the time. But there we go, that's quite nice. Now that'll be able to be sanded round quite easily to make that into a nice seam on there, and obviously it's quite noticeable. We've got the frisbee's going to cover a little bit of it, but obviously we'll still see quite a bit of this back area. Another noticeable one, even though we've got one down the front here. So we're just coming back with our same technique, scrape this clean. Okay, a bit more tricky up here because it's on a flat. It's really designed for a curved area, but we just want to do this until we're equal heights, just like that. Same thing, come along with the sanding stick. I'm just going to buff the two together, so hopefully we won't get any steps. Have a feel. If you can feel a step, chances are it's still there, and you just keep sanding away until that goes. This one at the back here, in a minute you'll see we're going to have to put another part onto that, but basically it's same with the front as well and with the side. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to carry on getting this one off on the other side, which is quite a tricky one. Then we can get this wing section onto the top. Okay, once that's on, what we'll do is we'll put the engine nauticals on there as well, and then we can have a good look round and see where we're going to do a lot of filler work. Obviously we're going to need a bit up the back here, without any doubt, probably a little bit on the front, certainly the engine nauticals. So I'll get these seams all along here taken care of, and then we can get those on, and then we can take care of those seams. Okay, all a bit of a mess, all part of the modelling process. Okay, basically, gone on, checked all the seams, very happy with them. Haven't bothered with the nose yet because we've got to do something separate for that. We're going to have to put this clear part on and do all those bits, but we can do all them all afterwards. What we're more worried about is obviously making nice seamless lines, which is obviously part of it. When you look at a model, you're looking for join lines and things like that. If we can eliminate all of those, it's great stuff. We've basically taken care of all these big ones down here. Now we've got a little bit of, as you can see here with the white dust, you can see it quite well. We haven't lost too much detail, but we've lost enough that I want to go around and do it. There's very little point doing that until you've got it as perfect as it can be. So what we're going to do, we're going to get the wing section put on top and the tail, okay, and that will enable us then to go round with things like Mr. Surfacer along the seam lines to make sure we're all seamless. If we're all seamless and we're all happy at that stage, then I'm quite happy that we can do a little bit of rescribing, re-riveting and bits and pieces we need. Now, the big things we're going to put on then, obviously this top wing section. We've gone along and we've sorted out the leading edges a little bit, not too much as I say. One thing I would mention at this point, when you're putting it together, it calls out to put these straight in. This is the end part. Now the thing is, it doesn't say is that if you're going to have it with the wings folded, you need a different set in here. It doesn't mention it in the instructions until the end. It just tells you to put these in, and then if you did, you know, and you did want it with the wings folded out, you have a different type of thing. So just have a skim ahead of it. I'm doing it wings folded, so we've got this one in, and obviously I'll put the other one in a moment. But if you're not, just leave it like that, and there's a spar system that goes through there which has got some nice ribs that basically come out which hold the rest of the wing on. So there we go. The other thing I've noticed doing a little bit of fitting all occasions is that for some reason the right hand side of the kit, these holes are actually fine, no problem at all. Left hand side, they're never big enough and it doesn't like to sit in there because of it. And then all I did, come along with a rat tail file basically of the bits of glue and just scrape them out bigger. Or if you wanted to, you could actually totally remove those pegs. But it's important to make those big enough for these to fit in. If you don't, what happens is it won't sit down. So just make sure they're flat on the top so it's got a nice bed to sit on. Now the first time you'll come along with this, you line up these 4 pegs underneath here. There's 4 pegs. Get those lined up and then obviously it sits on top. And you think, oh, that's gone quite well, until you try and get the back end in, and this back end doesn't like to go in at all. It sits high. The way I find to get around it is stick it in first, pop it in, and then it sits down. But there again, as we were saying, it's quite a nasty join there, quite a nasty join at the front. Underneath isn't too bad, admittedly, but that is a problem. Make sure you're all happy with how the insides are before you seal this up, and obviously clean out the little glass windows. All in there, make sure they're all nice and clear. Not that you're going to be able to see much in there, but it will just make it nice. So all we're going to do, we'll push that in the back, sit that in, bring the front up. Okay, we're going to use a super glue to seal this all together because it's going to need quite a bit of a thing. So we're roughly positioning it how we like it. So we're just going to come along, super glue, nice dollop on the top. Okay, cocktail stick, and we're just dragging it down both sides to how it's like. Now normally you could let this, we're just going to speed this up a little bit of kicker, just on there like that. Because using kicker, it makes it more thinner and it runs, and it will run off down to the edges quite nicely. If you give it a bit of a blow, you can speed up the drying time. That one's in, and obviously I'm holding down the front because the front likes to lift off as well. I'm going to use some super glue at the front because it's not exactly the nicest joins around. There again, in here, cotton. Both sides. I'm not going to go too near the front. Okay. Just in there, just get those all over the place. There again, more kicker. And just hold it for a second until those two totally dry off. If you move your hand at the moment, you end up, it pings off. So just hold it down there. And then at the same time, what you can do, you can come along with your extra thin, just like this. Okay, just down in here, and you can just put some nice generous amounts all down there. And those all get to work with the bottom seams. And it really isn't too bad a fit underneath, all things considered. We've had problems with other areas on it, it's actually not too bad at all. So plenty of glue and just letting the capillary action go off flow off like it does. Now normally you just leave that to it. We'll push on a bit. This rear tail section, there again, just be a little bit careful with it. It's got a nasty habit of wanting to pull apart. I used a bit of super glue down in there, but we've still got some little gaps at the rear, which I'll take care of. But I can do them once it's on. Then again, make sure these holes are all clear. And then what will happen is the tail should come along and fit on there. Have a good look at it. If you're happy with how it's going to sit and how it all is, then same thing again. You can just glue that straight forward into place. Just for speed, I'm just going to put a drop of super glue just around now. Obviously when you put it on, that's way too much, because what happens is if you leave that on there, it will squash out. So what we'll do, we'll pull it around and let it flow to the insides. So there we go, that's that on. Come along with our tail. Now, whilst it's just on there, make sure it's all sitting square. So have a look straight down it. So when you look at it like that, it should be nice and square. And that's the thing, just have a look, line it really up with its nose, make sure it's all square, because if it's slightly sitting to one side or something like that, it can be a real pain in the butt. Happy with those, we'll just give it a bit of kicker, both sides. We'll dry those off. Same thing again, we're just going to come in, even though we've got super glue, we're going to put plenty of extra thin up into these joints. What it will do, it will just double seal the joint. It won't weaken the super glue at all, but it will just fill up any cracks and bits that might be anywhere, and it will take care of them like that. So what we can do now is obviously put the engine nauticals on. There again, this is a slight little technical hitch to this. This one here we've still got to take care of and clean up, but I'll show you on this one here. Make sure you get your lefts and rights on there, because it is quite important, because it is easy to get it the wrong way round. Basically, the one with a higher edge goes to the outside. Now when you put these on, it doesn't like it at all. Basically, these little locating tabs, same thing again, don't really fit with these. One way I found to get around this problem, grab your knife and cut off the outer, or the inner I should say, the ones closest to the fuselage, locating pegs, just like that, and line them up with the outside ones. Now it's better to do this, and that way you'll get a better fit where the engine joins the actual outside. And obviously if you're going to be doing it as the wings folded area with this, it will just show it a little bit better, and that's the thing to it. So it can go up there. So I'm not going to pop it on yet, but that's what we do. But we have got, as you can see on the close up there, quite a nasty step on the top, which will see it take a little bit of filler. Well, actually it's going to take a lot more than a little bit of filler. It's going to take quite a bit of filler to get up there, but I'm going to get that one fixed on in a minute. Last bit for the moment, just to show you what we've done. Same thing again, I put super glue on the bottom of these areas here, okay, and around. So all we're going to do is use sanding sticks to just sand these and blend these all in. So we're basically the same way as we did the others, as we did all the others, we're just going to go around and rip into this quite heavily, okay, to get these in and cleaned up. And then usual thing, we'll come along with various grades, the same as we did for the other, and work our way to polish them out and make them look a bit better. At the same time in here, we can just clean up these intakes. So we're just squaring these off a little bit to make them look a bit nicer, to say the least, because they look horrible. So if we just pop around, there we go. As you can see, we've squared that one up, so in a moment we can pop it in. But we'll clean this up. We've got a little bit of a gap down there. We can do that with a little bit of Mr. Surfacer, which we'll do in a minute. So at the same time, whilst you're doing those, and you've got things drying and that, the great thing is, if you want to poke ahead a little bit, we've got the actual radome top and the radome itself got here. Okay, eventually this will sit, is it, hopefully, is that a word? Not sure. Okay, anyway, it will sit in there like that, and if you feel the weight of that, that's quite heavy just on its own. But that eventually, as we know, is going to come along and it will sit very nicely just in here like that, giving us our Hawkeye type shape. But as I said, I've glued this because we want this to really go off. Plenty of glue right the way around this edge. That way, when we come to sand it, we're not going to get any gaps in there. So if you can plan ahead and you want to move ahead with those, get those ones done. The same if you wanted to move ahead now, you could do the tails, putting all the tails together. Very straightforward, don't really need to talk you through that. And then obviously the end of the wings as well. If you wanted to move together whilst these things are all dry, you can do all those sub-assemblies and move on. As soon as these are dry and we're happy with, what we'll do is we're going to come along and say Mr. Surfacer, and we'll pop all those in, but we want all these to be totally dry before we start messing around with it and pulling it around. And then at the same time as we've got those bits all on the go, we can think about getting the glass work on the front. Right, we've got quite a mess here, and there's lots of parts obviously going on. So what we're going to do is talk you through really what we're getting to. Now, as we said, we've got one engine nautical on, as you can see, and I'll talk you through that in a moment. But what we've taken our time with is go around and make sure all the seams and everything else is absolutely fine on this. Now, this wing box section we said is on, and we've got super glue we're using as a filler. You can probably see on the close-up here. Basically what we've actually done is put it in and let it dry naturally. Don't use the kicker, as I said, and on the back one. And we've got another part up here. Now, as we were saying, when we was going together with these parts, taking our time with these engine nauticals really did pay off, especially doing this fourth one that I've done now, as we were saying, because taking your time and just going through it slowly and a bit of dry fitting makes it far, far easier than all the others I've used where I've had to get in there and use loads and loads of super glue as a filler and things like that. So what we've got, quite strong files again. We've got super glue across the top here, so we're just showing this one, very coarse on the top to start with. Okay, now I've got some little details. There's a little bit of an air scoop or cooling area on the top here of this engine nautical. Unfortunately, we're going to lose that. Camera's having a hard time focusing here. Come on, camera, get in. There we go. So obviously what we're having to do is basically take care of it, rip it all off, and we'll put it in afterwards, and we'll put it in. We won't worry about it too much, but for the moment we're just scraping off these top areas. Very strong file, just like so. Okay, and we're trying to get down to plastic, so it's all looking pretty smooth, although very, very scratched up. Now, if you can see little white areas in like this, sorry about this camera, it's having a real hard time today, I'm not sure why. There we go. You might be able to see some little white marks up in the top here. Now what that is, that's holes. We want to carry on and go right the way through those. So we want those to disappear. And when they disappear, we know it's all flat and flush. So there we go, those have gone now, and that's the type of thing we're after. So we move over to our file, and we give it a good old sand with that one. And as I say, like we're doing all the others, we'll work our way through the various grades, and then we can give this a buff up and come along. It's just a rough job on this one. I'll take care of it a bit better in a minute. Okay, and then obviously we'll work around, and then later on when we're all together, we'll actually put all these parts together and smooth them out. Now down here we've got a little bit of a super glue mark down here, and I've actually got some smaller files here, so we can just take care of that. And as I say, if we're losing any detail in these parts, it's a case of, well, we won't worry about it for the minute, we'll come back and take care of them afterwards. But what we're trying to do is get rid of all the super glue join marks, if you like, so it all looks like it's going to flow in one. So we just take care of that one. We've got another one down here, one under this seam line up here, and the same thing. So what we'll do, we'll go around and sand all of those off. Okay, then we'll get it together. Now if we move over to here, as you can see, this we've got a very nasty join up here on the top. Now as I said before, the best way to do this, remove the inner pins, okay, and then what we can do, we can just come along, and then this will fit under here. And on this side, as it happens, on the port side of the aircraft, they always tend to be a little bit better, and it's not so much of a joint as it over here is on the other side, but that will get those in and take care of it. Pretty straightforward to glue those on. Now this top section, as I was saying, you've got this seam line running along the top here. That one is always a little bit of a problem to do, as is the one at the back. There again, drop a super glue in there, letting it dry naturally, sand it down. You can probably see on the close-up the sanding marks I've already done. Second coat going on here now, and then what we'll do, working with it, we're just going to go along and sand it over to get rid of it and see how it looks. Okay, and what we're trying to do is just to blend it in like so. So quite a coarse files to start with, and then obviously we'll just work our way through them like we do the others. So there we go, that was that one through. Okay, and as you can see, you get the black line there. That's literally just the actual super glue. That's a good sign. And there we go. So what we want to do is just make sure you've got no little ridge lines, and there is a few left on those there that you probably can't pick up on the camera, but we want to lose those, because in a moment when we come along with Mr. Surfacer to take care of it all, we want those to be all nicely blended in. At the front here you can see we've actually got the landing light system and the landing markers underneath there. They're in. What we'll do once we've got the actual cockpit fitted on and things like that, then we can paint all these areas up. And then one of the problem little bits is going to be the nose cone comes along, you've got a couple of little locating tabs for it to go, and then hopefully this will super glue, this will stick on